You're listening to the planet's memory, where time breathes and the Earth remembers. What if the mountains once inhaled and exhaled, their ridges rising like lungs beneath the sky? In the beginning, the world was not quiet. It shifted and surged like a sleeping creature, dreaming itself into being. The crust had not yet hardened into continents. Instead, it flexed and swelled, vast sheets of molten thought cooling into slow, rhythmic motion. Beneath the crust, magma stirred like breath in a deep chest, each convective pulse shaping ridges and folds that would one day become mountains. They were not yet what we call mountains, not jagged, not snow-capped, not ancient. They were breathing bulges in the newborn skin of the earth, upwelling, stretching, collapsing. The lithosphere was young, pliable and alive with heat. Subduction had only just begun, that long, slow inhale as plates slid beneath one another, tucking themselves into the planet's warm interior, one plate yielding to another, as if in a tectonic sigh. The planet was still learning the rhythm of its own respiration, and in that breath, life was forming. The atmosphere thickened with exhalations of carbon and water vapor. Volcanic vents released the chemistry of potential hydrogen, nitrogen, traces of sulfur. From these primordial gases, clouds took shape, and rain began to fall. It was not gentle rain, not yet. It hissed against the scorched crust, carving furrows into newborn stone. These were the first lung lines of the land valleys etched by vapor meeting heat, cooled breath becoming flow. Rainwater moved downward, always downward, as if drawn by gravity's memory of the deep. It slipped into cracks and pores, cooled magma into basalt, wore igneous peaks down into grains. These first rivers were lungs too, their winding courses like alveoli branching through stone. Every drop, every rivulet, helped the earth to settle into its own body. And yet breathing was never just air. It was heat escaping. It was pressure easing. It was decay transforming into structure. Even the rocks themselves began to fracture, not from violence but from change. Temperature swings, chemical weathering and time's slow insistence. Granite split along its weakest lines, feldspar softened into clay, and quartz shone faintly in the fading warmth of buried days. The earth, we might say, was exhaling its memory into minerals. Over eons, these breaths became rhythm. Supercontinents collided and fractured. Orogens rose and eroded. The crust thickened where collisions stalled like scar tissue building into peaks. And those peaks, they grew old. They weathered under the gentle erosion of wind, water, and gravity, exhaling their heights grain by grain into the lowlands. Breathing in geology is not measured in minutes, but in million-year cycles. Even now, we walk upon the remnants of those early exhalations. Sandstone cliffs once buried beneath seas, metamorphic ridges folded by the pressure of slow tectonic inhalation, pressure filled with the shattered sighs of long-dead peaks. Each stratum a record of breath held, then released. But deeper still, the mantle moves with heat, convecting like breath within bone. Slabs of crust subduct beneath trenches drawn into the planet's interior where they melt and mix, the earth inhaling itself, and in volcanic arcs, this breath resurfaces as lava, as ash, as gas. The exhale, a never-ending rhythm, unseen yet ceaseless. We often forget that the crust is not static, it's just slow, but slowness is not stillness. In the language of stone, movement whispers. A mountain doesn't need to rise quickly to be alive. It only needs to shift slightly, to lean forward into gravity's pull, to allow water to carve its face over centuries. Breathing is a form of remembering, and so, in the deepest canyons, in the oldest cores of granite, in the twisted seams of gneiss and schist, we find the fossil record not just of life but of breath itself, oxygen trapped in minerals, isotopic signatures of ancient atmospheres, red beds formed when iron met air. These are the lungs of time, mineralized. And when we look up at a mountain, still, cold, unmoving, we forget how recently it was in motion, how recently it rose from the sea floor in a tectonic surge, how it trembled with aftershocks, how its flanks were flooded with rivers of ice. Breathing slows, but it does not stop. The earth is still moving, still warming and cooling, still inhaling crust and exhaling stone. Even when we sleep, even when we forget, the mountain remembers. It holds the memory of oceans, the signature of fire, the geometry of collapse. It rises, crumbles, rises again. And yet, if the echoes of these breaths still tremble beneath our feet, what else might the mountains still be trying to say from that ancient breath? The first rivers were born, not as we know them now, quiet, winding, domesticated, but wild and full of longing. They spilled from the flanks of newborn mountains, raw and steaming, tumbling over jagged stones still warm with memory. These waters moved not with purpose, but with instinct, drawn forward by gravity, by curiosity, by something deep and ancient, that even the earth itself had only begun to remember. They were the veins of a young planet, pulsing with runoff and ash, carving the earliest hieroglyphs into stone. Their banks shifted with each flood, each landslide, each tectonic shrug, and still they flowed, shaping the land, not just by erosion but by story. For rivers are storytellers, always have been. Each drop carries a memory, a flake of mica, a grain of quartz, a molecule of oxygen, once exhaled from a mountain root. They tumble downstream, slow and suspended, gathering more fragments of basalt, dust from a vanished sea, pollen from a forest now buried beneath time. Sediment is memory in motion. It layers itself along the edges of the world, pressing into deltas, marshes and plains, becoming mudstone, siltstone, shale, and in those layers the planet writes its diary. The isotopes buried in riverbeds tell us of climates long gone. Oxygen-18 ratios trace the warmth of ancient skies. Strontium and neodymium map the age of the bedrock. Even a single sand grain can whisper where it came from. A highland ridge now eroded, a volcanic dome that once thundered with light. The river does not forget. It only carries the remembering forward, and sometimes it circles back. Meandering through the lowlands, rivers fold upon themselves, looping like thought, like breath returning to its source. Oxbow lakes form where the river changed its mind. Floodplains pulse with seasonal renewal, as if the earth were still practicing how to breathe. These soft rhythms are not chaos. They are the planet's way of rebalancing, of finding silence in motion. And yet rivers can vanish. Some are swallowed by desert, their bones buried beneath dunes and salt. Others are diverted by fault lines, their courses bent like time around gravity wells. In dry valleys, ghost rivers leave behind nothing but sediment, braided channels etched into stone, mute witnesses of a time when water sang here. But even in absence, the memory remains. Satellite imagery reveals ancient riverbeds hidden beneath vegetation and soil. Radar pulses bounce off buried channels, mapping paths of water no longer visible. And deep below our cities and fields, aquifers still hold the breath of vanished flows, groundwater that hasn't seen sky for 10,000 years. We drink that memory, and so we too become part of the river's story, a continuation of that old planetary current. The water in our veins once slid past the roots of prehistoric trees, once mingled with trilobite tides, once rose as steam from volcanic springs. We are not separate from the river, we are one of its many shapes. But memory never truly ended there. In the Himalayas, the Ganges still carries glacial breath from peaks pressed against the sky. In the Amazon, dark waters churn with dissolved forest, with decay and rebirth. And in the Arctic, meltwater races across ice sheets, carving new canyons into permafrost, rushing to record its final thoughts before the ice forgets them. Even now, rivers are writing, not just with water, but with absence, with diversion, with drought. The handwriting is changing, more frantic, more broken, but still they flow, still they remember, because to be a river is to believe that forward is still possible, even when the banks collapse. And when you stand beside one, when you listen closely to its slow breath, you can almost feel it, the pulse beneath your feet, the memory in the mud, the endless return of what was carried away. And still, some waters move as if remembering the flow of breath. And yet, if the rivers still remember, what might they be trying to return to? Beneath their winding paths, beneath the deltas and the floodplains, beneath even the dust of vanished rains, lie the fossils, pressed into stone like whispers caught mid-sentence. It was not always foggy here. Once, light filtered through shallow seas, dappling the backs of trilobites, casting lacework across fields of microbial mats, and swaying soft-bodied creatures. They moved slowly, if at all, drifted, grazed, filtered the water for sunlight or silt. They had no bones, no eyes, no sense of deep time, only instinct. Only the rhythm of tides and the hush of sediment settling. But then something shifted. A storm overhead, a landslide from a breathing mountain, a bloom of life that became its own collapse. The sea floor darkened. Oxygen thinned, silt descended like fog, layer upon layer, and in that stillness, something strange happened. The moment held on, the living became outlines. Their breath, the final one, pressed into mud, their shape, fins, fronds, shells encased in time before decay could take them. And that moment, that singular transition between being and no longer being, hardened, it fossilized. To fossilize is to pause in the act of forgetting, to leave behind, not just form but story, the curve of a fin that once propelled, the segmented armor of a trilobite that once rolled in defense, a ripple across a seabed where something once slithered, now permanent, motionless, and yet speaking. Each fossil is a breath held by the earth. Not all creatures are remembered. Fossilization is rare, selective. It requires stillness, protection, timing. Most things vanish, consumed, crushed, dissolved. But a few are chosen by chance, or perhaps by the soft intervention of sediment. Their shapes are kept in the dark, in limestone, in amber, in shale, waiting for the right erosion, the right chisel, the right beam of light to wake them. And when they are found, we do not just find bones, we find decisions. This fish turned left, that fern reached toward light, this insect died mid-flight. And we, millions of years later, witness that gesture, that moment, as if time itself forgot to finish the sentence. In the Burgess Shale, high in the mountains of British Columbia, such memories lie cradled in stone. The creatures are delicate, soft-bodied, many-eyed, ribbon-limbed. They belong to an ancient sea that no longer exists, pressed into rock that now rests above the clouds. How strange that sea creatures dream within mountains, and stranger still that we find them there, because when mountains rise, they do not start fresh. They lift with them the past seabeds, riverbeds, entire ecosystems. Fossils once hidden beneath oceans are carried skyward, where air is thin and the cold bites. We hike ridgelines that were once coral reefs. We peer into rocks that once cradled breath. The mountain remembers by carrying the forgotten into view. And not all fossils are of bone. Some are of light, of behavior, of silence. A burrow fossil shows where something once waited. A gastrolith reveals how something once digested. Even coprolites, fossilized waste, tell stories of what was consumed. The planet is not shy about its memory. It is just slow to reveal it. And still, within foggy valleys and shale cliffs, more wait. Some so fine they hold the outlines of feathers, the patterns of skin. In China's Liaoning province, entire flocks of ancient birds sleep in volcanic ash, wings tucked as if dreaming. In Germany's Soldhofen limestones, dragonflies hover mid-flight, their delicate wings never folded, even the breath of their final moment, still sealed within the stone. But memory never truly ends there. Fossils dissolve, erosion wears them thin. The mountains crumble, and with them the archives of ancient breath, and yet they do not vanish entirely. Their calcium seeps into rivers, their stories pass into the sediment. The cycle turns, and new life forms shaped by extinction, by inheritance, by silence. We are descendants of what was remembered, and in our hands, sometimes we hold them, smooth spirals of ammonite, a vertebra from a swimming reptile, the imprint of a fern, and we wonder, how did this moment survive? Why this creature, not the countless others lost? Could it be the earth chose to keep this one dream? Each fossil is a breath, pause between what was and what still might be, a shape held not in amber, but in the fog of forgetting. And when the wind moves across a shale cliff, when it stirs the dust from a fossil's edge, it feels almost like a sigh. Could the mountain's breath have sealed their fate or preserved their dreams? And yet, if stone can remember breath, what else might be waiting in the fog to awaken? From that hush of fossil silence, another voice rises, quieter still, yet older, not the voice of bone or fin, but of root and ring. There was a time long before towers of steel or the scratch of machines, when forests ruled the highlands. Their canopies rustled like whispers across the shoulders of mountains, their trunks wide with memory. They grew without names, without maps, without ownership, only presence and breath. Each leaf a lung, drinking light and exhaling sky. Each ring a sentence, slow and circular, a story written inward, year after year. Forests were once the earth's lungs, exhaling oxygen into a world, learning how to live. The early atmosphere, still heavy with carbon and mystery, began to thin, as ferns unfurled and trunks thickened, as roots gripped the soil and fungi braided through loam. The air grew clearer, not clean but breathable. It was the trees that made that possible. And then, some of them turned to stone, not suddenly, not violently, but with patience, with silence, in low valleys choked by volcanic ash, in floodplains drowned by silt and sediment. Trunks fell and did not decay, their bark blackened, their roots stilled, but water moved through them still, slow, mineral-laden, thoughtful, cell by cell. The wood was replaced, not erased, replaced. Silica crept in like memory. Iron joined it, manganese, and over centuries or perhaps millennia, a tree became quartz, a trunk became a cathedral of chalcedony, jasper, opal, and yet the shape remained. Knots, rings, even the grain of bark, all preserved in glowing stone. Fossils, yes, but more than that. Sculptures of time, proof that even breath can harden into monument. In Arizona's painted desert, petrified logs lie scattered like fallen columns. Their colors shimmer, reds, blues, soft yellows, hidden greens. They look broken, but they are whole in a different way. Their voices are quiet, but not gone. For if you sit beside one, if you rest your hand on the polished smooth of its quartz ribs, you can feel it, a stillness that was once movement, a silence that was once song, and in some the growth rings remain, concentric pulses of existence, each ring a record of rain, of drought, of lightning and wind, a kind of calendar, a memory wheel, and still the forests kept growing. Others rose after them. More breath, more light converted into form, and still some trees turned again to stone, in forests now buried beneath Iceland, in coal seams of Wyoming, in the mineral-rich valleys of India and Madagascar. Trees once stood and now sleep, but even now some forests are turning slowly, breath by breath, toward that same fate, not from ash, but from time, not from eruption, but from accumulation, because to petrify is not to die, it is to be remembered in a different language, and we, the descendants of breath, still cut these trees, still polish their quartz bones into bookends, into beads. We carry them, wear them, display them, and yet few of us hear what they still whisper, because stone does speak, just not in sound. It speaks in patience, in pressure, in permanence. It speaks in the echo of what was once green, and if the mountains still remember the breath of ancient oceans, perhaps the petrified forests remember the breath of light itself. Perhaps in their mineral silence, they are still inhaling, still exhaling, only slower, and in some deep cave, in some buried valley, roots might still be dreaming of leaf, of wind, of sky. And maybe stone still remembers the breath of leaves. And yet, if forests can become stone, what might we one day leave behind in the lungs of the earth? From those still lungs, high on forgotten ridgelines, the dust begins to move. It does not rush, it drifts. It lifts gently from fractured stone and gathers in the seams of silence, carried by wind that barely stirs. It spirals, hovers, settles again. Dust has no urgency. And yet it travels farther than rivers. It crosses oceans. It crosses time. High above the world in the thin air of alpine spines, the wind combs through shale and scree, brushing over ancient fractures, stirring the remains of breath turned brittle. This is not soil, not sand, not ash. This is what remains after everything else has let go. A single grain might have once been mountain, a spark of feldspar, broken from the cliff face by centuries of frost, or a speck of volcanic glass, born in fire and cooled in air, or perhaps it was once life, bone worn to calcium, shell ground to powder, even pollen, spores, the soft collapse of something green. Dust is not the absence of form. It is form remembering how to dissolve, and it speaks in its own way. When the wind pushes it down a slope, it rasps against stone, a whisper of present. When it lands on the surface of a petrified tree, it fills the rings like memory returning. When it gathers in the corner of a cave, it cradles fossils in a soft, forgotten sleep. In deserts, dust is everywhere. It paints the air red at dusk. It buries footprints. It writes across dunes with the alphabet of wind. And in that motion, it carries history. In the Sahara, dust rises from once fertile lakes, now long gone. It drifts west across the Atlantic and feeds the Amazon, a rainforest fed by the remains of an ancient African seabed. Dust does not forget where it came from. Even in the air we breathe, it waits, invisible, patient, some of it from meteors, some from long-dead volcanoes, some from the breath of creatures who no longer walk this world. We carry that dust in our lungs. It settles on our skin, in our hair, across the roofs of our cities, and still we sweep it away. We clean, we erase, but the earth keeps making more. Because the mountain never stops exhaling, even if it crumbles slowly, even if it does so in silence. This erosion is not decay. It is continuation. It is the slow surrender of altitude into memory. And what is dust if not a record of that surrender? Scientists study loess, wind-blown dust deposits stacked in layers like chapters. In China, in the American Midwest and Eastern Europe, loess cliffs rise high, and within them pollen grains, volcanic shards, fossilized insects, a climate record, a breathing archive. Even the smallest particles hold stories, microscopic isotopes that reveal the age of uplift, traces of lead, of mercury, markers of when humans joined the story. And so dust has changed. Now it carries us too, our concrete, our plastics, our ash. We've joined the sediment, become part of the breath, techno-fossils in suspension. One day, wind will carry pieces of our world, our buildings, our books, our bones, and drop them on another slope, where they will rest beside trilobite dust and silicate flakes, and together they will whisper, not loudly, not now, but over time. They will shape soil, they will become stone, and in some far future, a ridge will rise, and the wind will stir again, brushing dust into echoes, because mountains don't die. They dissolve, and even in dissolution, they speak, not in thunder, not in quake, but in the soft rhythmic hush of dust falling, each grain a fragment of story, each drift a breath let go. Might dust be the last voice of mountains still exhaling their slow story? And yet, if even dust can speak, what else might still be writing across the skin of the earth, beneath that fine veil of drifting particles, under the gravel, under the fossil beds and forest roots? Something stirs without shape, not stone, not liquid, but air, ancient air, sky, sealed in darkness. It seems strange, doesn't it, that the atmosphere we look up to, that ocean of wind and weather, might also lie buried beneath us, and yet, far below the surface, trapped in microscopic pockets within basalt and crystalline rock, are remnants of the sky, gas from ancient eruptions, from primordial breath, from the first whispers of oxygen after the great oxidation event. These bubbles were caught mid-motion, sealed in lava, as it cooled, as if the earth inhaled and then forgot to exhale, and there they remain. In Greenland's icy cores, in South African mines, in Martian meteorites fallen to earth, we have found these fragments of breath, encased, preserved, waiting. What we once breathed may still linger in these subterranean lungs, deep within pillow basalts, those rounded volcanic shapes formed underwater. Scientists have found noble gases trapped for billions of years: helium, neon, argon, inert, unreactive, untouched by the chaos above, time held in silence. Other rocks carry carbon dioxide from vanished forests, methane from microbial blooms, even traces of sulfur from oceans long gone. Some of these gases date back to the Earth's formation, older than oceans, older than life, fragments of the planet's very first breath. And just as the surface sky changes, shifting from ozone-rich to smog-choked, from thunderous to still, so too does the buried sky evolve. Gases migrate through pores. They leak, diffuse, get drawn into chemical dances with minerals and metals. Some vanish into new forms. Others wait. These hidden atmospheres are not static. They are memory in motion. And sometimes they are released. A landslide, a seismic crack, a deep drill in a Siberian borehole. Suddenly, air that hasn't touched sunlight in eons finds its way out, and we unknowingly breathe something older than history. In the deep mines of Finland, workers have reported a strange stillness, not from the weight of stone, but from the presence of untouched air, thin, dry, alien, breathable, and yet ancient. It reminds us the sky is not just what hangs above, it surrounds us, envelops us, fills the hollows between atoms and mountains alike, and beneath our feet it lingers still, in caves lined with crystals, in aquifers pressed tight between limestone sheets, in the microfractures of ultramafic rocks 100 kilometers down. It's easy to forget, walking a trail or climbing a ridge, that just below the crust the earth is still exchanging breath, slowly, invisibly, but constantly, a geological respiration. Subduction zones draw in atmospheric carbon through seafloor sediments. Volcanoes return it to the sky, in plumes of ash and gas. The carbon cycle, the oxygen flux, the slow rhythm of respiration. They do not stop at the surface. They never did. We once imagined Earth as layers, sky above, crust beneath. But the more we learn, the more we realize these layers are not boundaries. They are conversations. The air we breathe may have once flowed through rock. The stone we stand on may have once held air. And what is more, some of that air may have passed through others before us, through lungs, through forests, through fire. Perhaps you are breathing right now a molecule once exhaled by a sauropod, or released in a fern forest beneath a Permian sun, or caught in a gas bubble inside a lava flow, only to be freed again in your lifetime. Because breath is not linear, it loops, it dissolves, it returns, and the earth remembers. Perhaps the greatest illusion is that the sky ends where our feet begin, but in truth, the sky has always flowed both above and below our steps. And yet, if breath is buried as easily as it rises, how many forgotten atmospheres lie waiting to exhale? Beneath the buried sky, beneath the softened crust where dust drifts and gases linger, deeper forces stir, slow, relentless, and dreaming. Down where tectonic plates meet and hesitate, then yield, down where one slips beneath another, disappearing into the molten dark. This is where the world folds itself inward. This is where subduction begins. Not an end, but a passage, a surrender, not into stillness, but into transformation. Subduction zones are deep scars in the planet's body, and yet they are alive, trenches thousands of meters deep. Ringed by volcanic arcs and island chains, they mark the boundary between what is seen and what is returning. Here, oceanic crust, heavy, salt-stained, ancient, is drawn downward into the mantle. It doesn't fall, it sinks like breath held too long, silently, surely, and with it go the remnants of everything that once lived upon that crust. Marine sediments rich with calcium and carbon, shells of plankton, dust from continents, even technofossils from our own era, microplastics, concrete, isotopic fingerprints, all of it rides the descending slab, all of it re-enters the earth. Subduction is not a burial, it is a recycling of memory. As the plate moves downward, heat increases, pressure builds. Minerals metamorphose, feldspar becomes eclogite, basalt shifts into blue schist, water is released from hydrated rocks, and that water released in ghostly plumes rises into the overriding plate above, lowering melting points, sparking magma. From the slow descent of stone, fire is born. Volcanoes rise, not in chaos, but in response, a mountain's breath exhaled upward through the crust, through the fault lines, through the trembling silence, each eruption, a memory returning, and so it loops. The ocean floor becomes volcano, becomes mountain, becomes sediment again. Plate tectonics is not simply motion, it is memory in motion. Even the Andes and Himalayas, those towering monuments of stone, owe their breath to ancient collisions and subductions, one plate yielding to another until peaks were thrust skyward. But those peaks too will erode, they will return to dust, to sediment, to ocean floor, and in time they will be pulled beneath. The earth does not forget, it dreams. Subduction is slow, often unnoticed, but it is constant. We live in a world shaped by what we rarely see. Deep beneath Japan, the Pacific plate dives under the Eurasian plate. This descent causes tremors, volcanoes, tsunamis, but also it creates new minerals, new crust, new breath. In subduction zones, diamonds form from carbon pressed beyond comprehension. Rare earth elements concentrate. Life may even begin. Some scientists believe that deep hydrothermal zones near subduction margins could have cradled the first microbes. In this sense, subduction is not just where the earth reclaims itself, it is where it begins again, and deeper still, some slabs dive so far they reach the lower mantle, 1,000 kilometers down. There they may persist for millions of years. Cool ribbons of crust spiraling through molten rock, a dream within a dream. And eventually, they may rise again, buoyed by upwelling plumes, melting, emerging, becoming land once more. Perhaps the mountain sleeps not in death, but in descent. Perhaps every crater, every rift, every ocean trench is a pause, not a period, a moment when the earth folds in on itself, so that it can breathe again, later. And we, who live above on crust that floats like skin atop this dreaming planet, rarely feel the weight of what lies beneath. But it is there, always moving, always remembering. Subduction is not the earth consuming itself. It is the earth reshaping its breath, because to breathe is to cycle, to forget and recall, to bury and lift. What we stand on now may have once been seafloor. What we cast into the sea may rise as fire in some distant age. Everything returns, and so the mountains too return. They slide beneath trenches, curl beneath continents, and wait for the moment when heat and time will call them upward again, not as themselves, but as something new. What if the mountains sleep there, waiting to breathe again? And yet, if the dream moves even in silence, how much of the earth is still turning in its sleep? There are places where nothing seems to move. Ridges stand quiet, valleys hold their breath. Stone looms above, unmoving, eternal, absolute. And yet, even here, stillness is a disguise, because stillness is not the absence of change. It is change too slow for the eye to see. A mountain, though it sleeps, is always shifting, not in earthquakes or eruptions, but in something gentler, in the hush of frost splitting a rock at dawn, in the exhale of wind carrying away one flake of stone, in the weight of lichen anchoring itself to a cliff. Erosion is not destruction, it is memory unraveling. A peak does not collapse in a single breath. It dissolves, grain by grain, into the long silence of time. And silence is never empty. It is the sound of moss growing over ruins, of water tracing its way down granite seams, of boulders softening their edges after centuries of sunlight and snow. This is the slow collapse of silence, the patient undoing of everything once lifted, and it happens everywhere, on the high plateaus where glacial winds whisper over shattered stone, in desert canyons where dust hisses along sandstone walls, on Arctic coasts where waves lap at permafrost cliffs, tugging them back into sea. Even the loudest peaks learn to quiet. There was a time when they rose with fire upheaved by colliding plates, carved by rivers of lava, but now their sharpness is gone. Ridges rounded, faces weathered, their voices softer with each passing season. Some have collapsed inward sinkholes where caverns grew too wide to hold their breath. Others have slumped outward. Landslides slowed across centuries, and still others have faded into plains, their last elevations carried downstream as sediment spread thin across floodplains, deltas, and the seabed's dreaming floor. Nothing is lost, only dispersed, only returned. Even the silence of erosion has structure. Geologists can read its rhythm, the layering of silt, the tilt of strata, the rounding of pebbles like time's fingerprints. And from that rhythm, a timeline unfolds, not of catastrophe, but of patience, of how a mountain forgets its height, of how stone becomes story. In this silence, stars rise and set, generations pass, and still the cliff crumbles, slowly, quietly, without witness. Somewhere in the Andes, a rock falls, not with thunder, but with a sigh, and in that sigh is everything, the history of pressure, the touch of ice, the heat of sun, the quiet work of roots widening a crack for 100 years. Even lichens speak in this language. Acid etched from their bodies softens the surface they cling to, a dialogue between biology and stone, so slow it becomes sacred. And what of us? Our cities rise faster than peaks, our monuments crumble faster than cliffs. We live in the instant, but the mountain speaks in eras. Still, we build on stone, we carve into it, we trust in its silence, but beneath our foundations, beneath the walls we call permanent, erosion continues. It reminds us, everything we make will one day whisper too. Maybe this is how mountains speak to the stars. Not with light, but with release, with the letting go of weight, with the folding of presence back into plainness. They do not shout, they dissolve. And in that dissolution, they return to something more essential: dust, sediment, stillness that moves. Even the oldest stone is always softening. Even silence breathes. And perhaps silence is how mountains speak to the stars. And yet, if even silence collapses with grace, what new shape is the earth already becoming beneath our feet? In the stillness of crumbling ridges, a deeper truth begins to stir, a truth older than motion, quieter than stone. Entropy. Even here, in the high places where symmetry once reigned, nothing holds its shape forever. Once there was order. Once the summits rose in clean arcs lifted by tectonic breath. Ridges aligned like ribs beneath the sky. Glaciers carved valleys into balance. Cirques echoed one another, mirror perfect. Moraines spread like lines in a script. The earth had written in ice, and yet that order was temporary. Entropy, the slow dispersal of structure, came not in violence, but in drift. A freeze-thaw here, a slip of talus there. Time's chisel carving asymmetry, one flake at a time. The high places were never meant to remain precise. They were only meant to begin that way. It is a law of the universe. Energy spreads, edges blur. What once held tight unravels. And so the mountains, though born in symmetry, exhale disorder. They break themselves down, not out of decay, but out of participation in the wider breath of time. Look closely at a summit, not from afar, but from its fractured ledges, its lichen-draped faces, its loose scree. You will see it, the unraveling, the geometry that once was, now softened, disrupted, reimagined. Entropy lives in the smallest things, a boulder split, not by explosion, but by centuries of expanding ice, a perfectly folded stratum, skewed by a subtle fault, a once glacial bowl, now flooded with sediment, its curve lost to the slow generosity of collapse. And yet disorder has its own kind of beauty. Chaos is not chaos at all, but the next chapter in the planet's quiet script. The universe itself tends toward this, toward dispersion, from stars to sand, from glacier to grain. The mountain is not resisting this. It is embodying it. It rises in order. It falls in grace. And between the two, the slow, holy unraveling. Somewhere in the Alps, a ridge once perfect has slumped. Its layers no longer align. Rockfall litters its base. A scatter of decisions made by frost, gravity, and time. No one heard it happen. No one needed to. Entropy works best in silence. Even the atoms within the stone rearrange, radioactive decay within minerals releasing heat, changing isotopes, ticking geologic clocks forward. The very bones of the mountain shift, and high above glaciers melt. Not suddenly but steadily. Their edges fray, their tongues retreat. Their ice, once rigid and articulate, becomes water, becomes mist, becomes rain falling on a valley floor that has forgotten the weight of ice. Order moves outward, entropy expands. But this isn't a loss, it's a transformation, because from this disorder comes diversity. From the broken cliff, scree fields bloom with alpine moss. From the slumped moraine, wetlands cradle birdsong. From the collapsing ridge, streams form, winding, braided, free. Entropy isn't the end of meaning, it's the widening of it. Perhaps the mountains are not dying. They are letting go of form, of precision, of the need to hold shape. And maybe that too is a kind of breath, not one we measure in oxygen, but in the release of pattern, the dispersal of story, the becoming of something less defined and more complete. And so we stand on slopes that shift. We climb ridges that remember form, but no longer insist upon it. And we call them beautiful, because they are, because disorder too is sacred. What if the mountains exhale not air, but disorder itself? And yet, if even the highest places unravel with grace, Might entropy be the Earth's final form of poetry? Not all collapse is dry. Some dissolves into melt. Far above the tree line, where silence thickens and time forgets to move, the ice still sleeps, massive, ancient, veined with air. Older than memory, glaciers slide with imperceptible grace, pressing into the bones of mountains. To the eye, they seem eternal, motionless, but within them breath stirs, and below them something darker waits. Ash, hidden between layers of compressed snow. Volcanic ash lies sealed in bands, fine as breath, light as dust, silent as forgetting. These are the ashes of eruptions long erased from human story, calderas that split open under ancient skies, lava fountains that scorched the tundra before names, mountains that exhaled fire into the air, only to be buried again by centuries of falling snow. And still the ice holds them. In Iceland, Greenland, Antarctica, scientists drill deep into glacial cores, pulling from the cold a chronology of flame. Each ash layer a fingerprint of eruption, each particle a record of pressure, heat, collapse, a dialogue between fire and frost. They should not meet, and yet they always have. Beneath the Vatnajökull ice cap, volcanoes breathe in secret. Eruptions there do not roar. They melt. Lava slides beneath kilometers of glacial armor, boiling meltwater into hidden floods. They surge suddenly, violently, then vanish, leaving behind nothing but silence and reshaped stone. These Jökulláofs, glacier outburst floods, are the whispered confessions of heat beneath cold, because even the frozen breath of the earth remembers warmth. Ash does more than mark eruption. It fertilizes, feeds, renews. Carried by wind, volcanic dust lands on ice sheets and darkens their surfaces. In that darkness, light is absorbed. Melting quickens. The ice sighs, and what melts may wake bacteria. Ancient gases, traces of past climates sealed like secrets in frozen time. Somewhere beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, a subglacial lake pulses beneath kilometers of pressure. It has never touched air. It has never felt sunlight. And yet, it exists. Warm liquid. Alive. What breath lies preserved there? What echoes of fire have nested beneath the weight of frost? Even ash itself can carry warmth. Not in heat, but in story. It tells us where the earth once cracked open, where magma found sky, where the planet, unable to hold its breath any longer, let go. And though the fire may be forgotten, the ice does not forget. It seals, preserves, waits, and as the climate shifts, as glaciers retreat, as permafrost weeps into rivers, as melt spreads where frost once ruled, the ash begins to move again. Winds carry it across continents. Rivers stir it from ancient beds. We find it in the layers of peat, in the cores of sediment, in the lungs of the air we breathe, the memory of eruption, returning, and perhaps this is not loss, perhaps it is reminder that even silence burns, that even stillness once roared, that beneath every white plain lies a shadow of flame, because glaciers do not only freeze time, they cradle it, they carry what we forget, and when they melt, it is not just water that flows. It is memory, it is breath, it is fire. Thawed is the mountain's breath preserved in ice, or thawing back into flame. And yet, if fire can sleep beneath frost, what else might stir as the cold begins to vanish? Leave in the reach of melting glaciers past the layers of ash and dust and stone. The earth begins to hollow. It does not collapse. It opens. Through the slow erosion of limestone, through the seep of acidic rainwater and mineral-rich streams, the ground becomes porous, caves form, vast, hidden, breathing spaces. They open like lungs carved into the crust, not filled with wind, but with silence, with memory. Somewhere beneath the surface in total darkness, light returns, but not the kind that warms or blinds or burns. A different light. A quiet one. In the Waitomo caves of New Zealand, glowworms dangle from ceilings like threads of starlight. Their blue shimmer reflects in pools so still they seem to hold the sky. But it is not sky. It is not space. It is stone dreaming. And in that dream, light flickers. It is not the only place. In caves across the world, strange lights emerge from minerals that fluoresce, from bacteria that pulse, from forgotten creatures clinging to rock walls in bioluminescent stillness. The light here is not for seeing. It is for remembering. These caverns are not just empty spaces. They are slow lungs. Every drip from a stalactite is breath measured in minerals. Calcium carbonate. Time. Stalagmites rise from the floor, inch by inch, growing not like trees but like echoes. They record in rings the flow of water, the composition of past rainfall, the shifts of climate above. Some of the oldest climate records on Earth lie not in glaciers or sediments, but in these speleothems, these stone growths that remember the shape of every drop. Here deep in the dark, the Earth keeps its most intimate diary, and above the world forgets. Cities are built, forests are cleared, rivers are dammed, but below, the cave remains unchanged. In its quiet, it holds light that has never seen sun, and silence that has never known wind. There are cave chambers, so vast they could hold cathedrals, and others so narrow they seem to breathe, inhaling as the air warms, exhaling as it cools. The earth, even here, still breathes, and in some caves, ancient humans once stood. Their torches flickered across walls, now lined with paintings, red ochre hands, black charcoal bison, the silhouettes of deer and stars and something more. Perhaps it was not art. Perhaps it was memory, a way of saying, we saw, we felt, we breathed, here too. And now, those flames are gone, but the walls still glow faintly with the soot, the shadows of intention, the breath of those who came before, flickering like the glowworms above. Could it be that light never truly vanishes, that it only finds quieter places to live? Some caves hold radioactive gases, radon exhaled from granite depths. Some breathe moist air into dry tunnels, feeding hidden ecosystems of blind fish, colorless insects, organisms that evolve to listen instead of see. Even here, where light seems impossible, life adapts, learns to glow, and maybe stone remembers that glow. Maybe the pulse of breathing rock is not measured in earthquakes or eruptions, but in how it holds the faintest shimmer through the longest darkness. Could forgotten light be the pulse of breathing stone? And yet, if the earth glows in places we cannot see, what other lights might be flickering just beneath our knowing? Far beneath those glowing caverns, beneath the stone and sediment and fossil-rich layers, something vast stirs without motion, a weight too great to measure, a slowness too deep to feel. Continents. We imagine them fixed landmasses like anchors, solid and final, but they are always moving, always dreaming, not with urgency, not with haste, but with the long breath of a sleeping planet. They drift like thoughts beneath consciousness. The great plates of the lithosphere slide on the soft rock of the asthenosphere below, propelled by convection currents deep in the mantle, guided by the faint geometry of heat and gravity. And though they move only centimeters per year, they have rearranged the entire face of the Earth. What is now the Arctic once kissed the equator. What is now the Himalayas was once seabed. And what is now Africa and South America were once one breath, split by time, by distance, by forgetting. We call it continental drift, but it is more than that. It is the planet's slow exhale, each drift a pause between tectonic pulses, each collision a moment of geologic remembering. When plates meet, they do not whisper, they rise, they fold crust into mountains. The Alps, the Andes, the Appalachians, all born from the quiet inevitability of drifting forms converging. And then they fall silent again. The mountain ranges weather, the plates continue, new oceans open, old ones close, land is reshaped, not by force but by patience. This is the sleep of continental drift, a planet in motion too slow for waking eyes. But we know it's happening. We can measure it. With GPS, with satellites, we watch continents migrate. Australia edging north, the Atlantic widening by inches, the Pacific slowly shrinking. And in these movements, the Earth rewrites its own map. No coastline is final, no range eternal, no ocean safe from becoming land. Even the supercontinents are dreams the planet once had. Pangaea, a great mass where all lands touched. Before that, Rodinia, before that, Columbia. Each one formed, broke, wandered, and found itself again. This cycle of assembly and dispersal is called the supercontinent cycle, and it is the Earth remembering and forgetting and remembering again. Perhaps the planet does not keep a fixed memory. Perhaps it chooses to drift through its past, the way we wander through dreams, half familiar, half lost, and still, drifting changes everything. Ocean currents shift, climate patterns rewrite themselves, species evolve in isolation, then collide when the lands reunite. Even extinction flows from this drift. As continents rearrange, habitats vanish, new ones rise. Life must adapt or disappear. And still the planet breathes on. We walk on this drifting crust as though it was still. We build cities on it, chart borders across it, treat it as permanent. But the ground beneath us is only passing through. It does not hurry. It does not rest. It drifts, the continent between dreams. And in that drifting, a kind of peace, a release from destination. Maybe drifting is how the Earth forgets and remembers. And yet, if the ground itself is moving, how much of what we build will ever stay where we leave it? The mountains move too slowly, imperceptibly, but not alone, for they carry with them the bones of the ancient world. Not just stone, not just crystal or cooled magma, but the remains of beings that once breathed, once swam, once saw sunlight shimmer across waves, now long gone. We call them fossils, but they are more than that. They are the bone memory of the planet, held in shale and limestone, pressed into cliffs, curled inside folded rock. Somewhere high in the Alps, at the edge of a glacial shelf, you can trace the ridged imprint of a trilobite, a creature that once scuttled across a seabed 500 million years before our first footprints. Here on this lofty ridge is the fossil of a sea that no longer exists. Here beneath your fingertips is a breath once taken under ancient water. How did it get here? Continents rose, oceans vanished, sediment hardened, life became shape, shape became stone, and stone became mountain. The bones of trilobites, the coils of ammonites, the armor of brachiopods, all now layered into peaks that pierce the sky. Their breath, their weight, their story held in the Earth's rising skin. There are places where entire cliff faces rid like an obituary of the ancient world. Skeletons pressed into vertical walls as if life itself had tried to climb out before the sediment sealed. The Burgess Shale, the Solnhofen Limestone, the Morrison Formation. Each one a library of marrow and mineral. Each one a pause in the Earth's long exhale. And not all bones are small. There are mountains that hold the ribs of giants, fossilized femurs of sauropods, spines of marine reptiles longer than our stories. In Patagonia, in Mongolia, in the Badlands of North America, the bones lie waiting, curled in sediment, reaching back toward a sky they no longer recognize. And still, the mountain holds them, not like a tomb, not like a prison, but like a memory that refuses to fade. Some bones are turned to stone completely, permineralized until even their pores are quartz. Others are partial, ghosts of calcium, lingering in red clay, and some are only trace, a footprint, a burrow, a ripple in sand that hardened before it could collapse. yet each one breathes in its own way. When we find them, brush dust from vertebrae, photograph the curve of an ammonite spiral, we are not discovering, we are listening to the Earth's interior voice, because to be embedded in stone is not to be erased, it is to be kept, and not just the great creatures, but the forests too, the ferns, the cycads, the trees that shaded dinosaur skin, their imprints, their charred trunks, their pollen still caught in rock, all layered into the mountain's rising form. And what of us? What bones of ours will rise again? What footprints will harden into future cliff faces? What fragments of breath will be carried into some yet unformed peak millions of years from now? Perhaps plastic, perhaps concrete, perhaps the quiet bones of cities pressed flat beneath future seas and lifted again long after we are stories. Does the mountain still carry their breath in its marrow? And yet, if the earth holds the bones of what came before, how long until it cradles the shape of us? 2. Not all memory is made of matter. Some of it is made of light, and not the light we see dancing on water, or flashing through cloud, or bleeding from distant stars, but light that's been stilled, paused, captured, trapped inside the lattice of crystals and feldspar, in quartz, in volcanic glass cooled so quickly it never had time to forget. This is light you cannot see, and yet it's there, caught in defects, in fractures too small to feel, in empty spaces between atoms, photons that once struck a surface from sun, from lightning, from fire, and instead of vanishing, settled in, waited. We call it luminescence. When these minerals are heated, or touched by another beam, they release the light they've stored, a soft glow, a quiet exhale of time. In that light, we read when a grain of sand last saw the sky, when a rock last lay exposed, when a valley last flooded, or dune last wandered beneath wind. Scientists call this optically stimulated luminescence, but what it truly is petrified light, the sunbeam paused, the breath of a fire held mid-sigh in caves. This frozen light tells of vanished entrances, in deserts. It traces buried rivers, in ancient hearths. It glows from charcoal, whispering how long ago the flame flickered out. It's as if the world has been collecting pieces of brightness, tucking them into stone, saving them for a time when someone might ask, and even when we don't ask, they wait. Because crystals have always been silent archivists. Within their structure, they align, they bend, they hold, each one a miniature library, recording temperature, radiation, pressure, and yes, even light. In amber, too, sunlight is preserved. A trapped insect, its wings still glowing with iridescence, its shadow held in golden resin. As if paused mid-flight, the beam that touched it, then, may still linger, echoing inside a fossilized drop of tree breath. And what of opals, with their spectral shimmer, their play of color, born from millions of silica spheres, aligned just so, diffracting light, like a secret language? Hold one in your hand, and it pulses, not with its own light, but with the fractured memory of 1,000 suns, and sometimes even meteorites carry this same silence. Crystals formed under alien skies, light held in metallic veins, crossing the void to land on our drifting earth and whisper stories we haven't yet learned how to hear. Perhaps that's what all light wants, not to vanish, but to remain, to find a home in matter, to curl inside a flaw in the lattice and wait, because light, like breath, needs something to move through, and stone is the last place we expect it to stay. But stay it does, hidden in the glow of minerals, in the glint of powdered sand, in the shimmer beneath your feet on a quiet trail. And when it is released, not always visible, but there it feels like the earth is exhaling again. Not with wind, not with fire, but with a breath of light that took centuries to form. Is light just another form of breath, frozen mid-sigh? And yet, If the planet stores light in stone, what else might be quietly glowing, waiting to remember? Not all memory glows. Some memories shift, and some break. Beneath every still plain and folded ridge, beneath every field of grass and sweep of meadow, the earth holds a line, a place where it has come apart, faults, fractures in the crust where two blocks of the planet's skin no longer agree. One moves north, the other south. One lifts, the other sinks. They are not violent by nature. They are only the visible traces of ancient negotiations, unfinished conversations in stone, and in these places the earth sighs, not with wind, not with heat, but with tremor, with pressure building in silence, then releasing all at once, or in gentle slips too subtle for us to feel. We think of earthquakes as rupture, sudden, destructive, loud, but most are not. Most microquakes ripple beneath our feet each day, barely registered by our senses, but heard clearly by the instruments we've placed deep in the ground. Seismometers that listen to the planet's buried breath, and what they hear is never truly still. The San Andreas Fault, the North Anatolian, the Alpine, the East African Rift. These are not scars. They are lungs, edges of tectonic plates that exhale tension, inhale strain, pulse with heat and time. Along their lengths, rock grinds against rock. Slowly, irresistibly, it sticks, it holds, and then it slips. And in that moment, waves of motion fan outward through the crust. Pay waves, S waves, surface waves, each one a ripple of unspoken release. And though we measure these waves with numbers, with magnitude, with energy, perhaps they are something else. Perhaps they are the mountain's voice, not shouting but whispering, I am not done, because faults are never finished. They are not healed. They do not close. They move, pause, and move again. Some faults grow quiet for 1,000 years, then speak again in a single breath. Others shift constantly, creeping forward, day by day, millimeter by millimeter, like thoughts being slowly remembered, and within their depths, new minerals form, crystals aligned along stress planes, veins of quartz born in sudden heat, friction melting rock into glass, known as pseudo-tachylite. Even in rupture, creation, even in fracture, order, these zones of weakness are also zones of transformation. Faults redirect rivers, birth valleys, raise peaks. They do not only tear, they also sculpt. Some of the most fertile soils, the richest geothermal fields, the deepest aquifers, all found along fault lines. It's as if the earth, when allowed to move, becomes more generous, and we live beside them, on them, within their shadow, sometimes fearing the suddenness of their breath, but rarely listening to its rhythm, because faults don't just whisper to the stone. They whisper to us that nothing is unmoving, that change does not always roar, that the deepest shifts may arrive without sound, beneath silence, inside sleep. And maybe that's how we change too. Not all at once, but slowly, along fault lines in the self, invisible fractures where pressure builds, until a shift, an opening, a release. Perhaps the mountain teaches us this, through its quiet slips, through its buried tensions, through its refusal to remain still for too long. Perhaps faults are the mountain's way of whispering, I am not done. And yet, if the earth breaks to remember, what might we find by listening between the cracks? Deep in the folds of tomorrow's rock, a new kind of fossil is forming. Not bone, not shell, not fern pressed into shale, but polymer, concrete, circuitry, beneath landfills and leveled cities, beneath highways swallowed by floodplains and shorelines lost to time. Our remnants settle, our signals fade, and the long, slow pressure of the earth begins to claim what we leave behind. These are the technofossils, the new stratigraphy of us. Every crushed phone, Every melted toothbrush, every plastic thread from forgotten fabrics, they drifted downward into sediment, into the slow silence of geological time. We do not see them now as memory. We see them as waste, disposed debris. But the earth does not categorize so quickly. In the eyes of stone, a trilobite and a tire are both just shapes, density, composition, a presence caught in time. Already geologists have begun to find strange markers, plastic glomerates, rocks fused with plastic, shimmering with fragments of rope, netting, bottle cap, anthropocenic layers, stained with fly ash, flecked with aluminum and synthetic isotope signatures, concrete structures buried and flooded, turning slowly into mineral veins through slow hydration. The line between artifact and fossil grows thin and thinner still as centuries pass. One day, a quarry may reveal the core of a skyscraper folded into sandstone, a layer of compacted steel thin and shining in the sun. Beside it, a jawbone of a deer, a coffee cup, a coin, a trilobite's twin, not in form, but in fate, pressed into the story of the earth. And long after our satellites fall, after our signals dissolve into background noise, these things will remain, carbon-rich layers, microscopic beads of plastic in marine clays, new minerals born from combustion and alloy, a planetary memory of us. We cannot yet imagine how strange this strata will seem to the eyes of the far future, to whatever descends next into the rock record, to whatever walks the beaches of continents not yet formed. Will they wonder what we were, what we built, what we breathed, what we left behind? They may hold a fossilized motherboard in their hands and see not a tool, but a puzzle, not a failure, but a trace. Because even technofossils breathe, not with lungs, but with meaning, with the weight of having once been touched, once been made, once been let go, and like the trilobites, they will fade, compressed, rewritten, turned to mineral or silhouette, but some part will stay. The earth remembers not through intention, but through pressure, through layering, through forgetting slowly enough. We have already entered the stone, and when the mountains rise again, when subduction lifts the seabeds filled with our remnants into high places, they will speak. They always do. Their cliffs will carry whispers of our time, a seam of unusual rock, a concentration of rare metals, a strange silence in the fossil record, and the wind will brush against those ridgelines, centuries from now, and ask, what were they? What was their breath made of? What did they become? And then, will the mountains speak of us? And yet, if our traces join the strata, what story will the earth tell of the age when plastic learned how to breathe? It begins with a drop, clear, cold, free. One drop becomes a stream. The stream becomes a veil of water trailing down a glacier's flank, tracing lines once frozen, now dissolving. This is the meltwater, born from retreat, born from thaw. As ice releases its grip on the land, something remarkable happens. Time loosens, memory softens, and the earth begins to remember out loud, because when glaciers recede, they do not vanish in silence. They leave behind pools, still gleaming, impossibly clear, meltwater mirrors. These mirrors do not only reflect the sky, they reflect what has been hidden beneath weight and silence for thousands of years. Bones, ruins, fossilized forests, the outlines of ancient roads, and seeds that once dreamed of blooming. In the Alps, Ötzi rose from the melt, a man caught mid-stride, preserved in ice for over 5,000 years. With him came grasses, grains, tools, echoes of a life interrupted, but never erased. In Siberia, mammoths emerge with fur still intact, not fossil but flesh, bones wrapped in frozen memory. And in the high Arctic, entire landscapes bloom with plants last seen in the Pleistocene, their seeds long dormant beneath frost, now fading, Meltwater doesn't just reveal, it resurrects. And yet, it also reflects. Stand beside one of these glacial pools and look into its surface. You'll see yourself, but also the cliff behind you, the clouds above, the sun reversed. It's as if time folds inward, as if past and present occupy the same smooth surface, held there in a trembling pause. The water is cold, but beneath it, warmth stirs. Peat unfurls from melting bogs, releasing ancient carbon, a breath trap since before the first temple stones were placed. Methane rises in soft bubbles, trapped greenhouse gas, exhaled at last. A slow release from lungs once sealed in permafrost, and the earth sighs. But with each sigh comes revelation. The meltwater is not empty. It is full of memory, dissolved minerals from ancient bedrock, dust from continents carried on wind, fragments of pollen, faint traces of ice ages ending, and the beginnings of something new. Sometimes it runs fast, carving new channels through newly exposed stone. Sometimes it gathers, shallow lakes growing like silver leaves across the land, and sometimes it disappears beneath the surface, slipping into unseen caverns, joining aquifers that may not rise again for centuries. Water moves with purpose. We cannot always see, and still it reflects, even as it flows, even as it seeps, even as it reshapes the world. Perhaps that is the mirror's secret, that it does not only show what is, it shows what has been and what remains. In meltwater, the earth speaks not of loss, but of layers, of how no ice sheet ever truly forgets what it covered, of how the land beneath remembers pressure like a bruise, and reshapes itself when the weight is gone. Even bedrock rebounds. It lifts slowly, like a breath returning after a long, frozen silence. And in that uplift, new landscapes emerge. Islands rise, lakes shift, rivers carve again, as if the land too is waking. The mirror stirs. It shimmers with light that touches both memory and becoming. And when we peer into it, we see not just our reflection but the silhouettes of what waited beneath, what endured, what adapted, what lingered in sleep, and maybe, just maybe, what still waits. What if the mirror shows not just the past, but what still lingers? And yet, if the water is remembering us, how long before we see ourselves as part of its reflection too? When water vanishes, it does not leave nothing. It leaves salt, stretching out beneath the sun like glassed skin. Salt flats shimmer across dry basins, white, brittle, impossibly flat. At first glance they seem lifeless, unmoving, but look closer, and they speak. They speak in patterns, in polygons of crystal cracking across the plain, in waves of sediment drawn into symmetry by the memory of tides. They speak in silence, so bright it almost hums, because salt, like dust, is a breath left behind, not air, but ocean, held too long then stilled. Long ago water covered these places, vast inland seas, shallow bays, warm lagoons where sunlight danced through brine. They pulsed with life, plankton, mollusks, ancient fish, and then they dried, not in a moment, but over centuries. Mountains rose, rivers shifted, climate turned, and the water fled, but the salt remained, layered, crystallized. Salt is a geologic memory of breath once held, and still it changes. Salt moves slowly. Beneath thick layers of sediment, salt can flow like cold honey, forming domes that rise through the crust, displacing rock, warping strata. They're called salt tectonics, the ghost motion of a substance that should not move at all. Some of these domes trap oil and gas. others warp entire landscapes, and some collapse, their hollow hearts draining like lungs exhaling for the final time. Salt too breathes, and not just through shape, through sound. In certain caverns, salt walls ring faintly when struck, a soft chime, a crystalline echo, a tone held from when the sea was still singing. In every grain of table salt, there is a world, cubic, simple, ordered, but built from the ruins of water. Even our bodies carry this memory. Our blood, our sweat, echoes of the brine that birthed us. Our veins, saltwater rivers carried inward. We are not separate from these flats. We are their continuation, and the mountains know this. In their flanks lie entire beds of halite, formed when ancient seas evaporated in closed basins, preserved, layered, buried beneath basalt and sandstone. Sometimes miners dig through them, finding crystals clear as glass, fragments of ancient oceans sealed away before mammals ever walked the surface. These are not fossils of life. They are fossils of conditions, of chemistry, of atmosphere, of balance lost. Salt is what happens when water is told to leave and cannot take everything with it. It crystallizes longing, and in those patterns, in those plains that gleam under endless sun, something waits, not life, but the shape life once needed, not breath, but the place where breath was once exchanged. Is salt the breath of oceans, waiting to return? And yet, if even stillness crystallizes memory, what other forms of longing might the earth be hiding in plain sight? Sometimes memory doesn't linger in the visible. It lives in the spaces between in what disappears. There have been moments when the planet paused, when the rhythm faltered, when breath slowed so deeply it seemed to stop. Mass extinctions, not just events but thresholds, moments where the curve of life bent downward and the future was forced to become something else. 5 times, perhaps more, the earth has held its breath. Once volcanic floods choked the skies. Once an asteroid painted the heavens in fire. Once oxygen itself became too much. And each time, oceans emptied, forests blackened, species vanished by the thousands. The pulse thinned, life narrowed, and yet the earth did not die. The mountains still breathed, not with lungs but with motion, with heat rising from the mantle, with rivers reforming their paths through emptied valleys, with minerals shifting, cooling, cracking open new spaces for light. Below the surface, microbes waited. In darkness, ferns coiled. From the ash, something always stirred. The breath returned. Not the same, never the same, but still breath. The Permian extinction, the Great Dying, wiped out more than 90 of marine life, and yet not all. The pulse weakened. But somewhere beneath volcanic basalt in pockets of quiet, the rhythm flickered, and from that silence, ammonites, corals, the strange beginnings of dinosaurs. Each extinction was not a full stop. It was a contraction, a drawing in, as if the planet were inhaling before something new. And what followed was variation. After the Ordovician collapse, jawed fish evolved. After the Devonian die-off, forests thickened. After the Cretaceous asteroid fell, mammals rose from the undergrowth. Birds unfurled feathered memories of vanished dinosaurs. Extinction does not erase the mountain's breath, it reshapes it. And through each breath cycle, the earth remembers differently. Geologists read this pulse in isotope shifts, in iridium layers, in gaps in the fossil record, in sudden appearances of new forms, teeth where before there were only plates, petals after centuries of ferns. The breath changes, but it continues. Even now we feel the pulse weakening again. Species vanish daily, forests contract, coral reefs bleach, the atmosphere fills with gases once locked deep in stone. Some call it the 6th extinction, some say it has already begun, and still the breath persists. Somewhere seeds lie dormant. Somewhere ice holds the code of creatures we do not know. Somewhere, deep beneath the ocean floor, microbial life expands slowly into the basalt, mapping futures we cannot yet see, because life is not only surface, it is not only now, it is resilience etched into geology, a pattern of collapse and return, not repetition, but rhythm. The earth is not fragile, it is recursive. Even death becomes sediment, even loss feeds the next breath. And the mountains, though scarred by fire and flood, still hold the pulse, still exhale minerals into water, still fracture with warmth, still rise slowly, offering new altitudes to what evolves. In their slopes, new creatures find niches, new lichens write their quiet names in stone, new roots reach. Could every end be part of a longer inhale? And yet, if extinction is a silence, then who or what is already learning how to sing in the space it leaves behind? Above that silence, the sky still breathes. Clouds gather, pressure builds, and from the hush, rain falls. Not in torrents, not always, sometimes just a fine mist. A few drifting drops on a forgotten slope, soft, fleeting. But rain remembers. It remembers where it once carved valleys, flooding glacial melt through canyons, cutting through basalt and clay, etching its name into the planet's skin. It remembers seed, the sudden bloom, the cracking open of husks buried for seasons, the first inhale of a sprout, made possible only by the fall. Rain was once invitation. It brought green to the scorched. It turned dust into breath. It woke forests. It softened stone. It filled the lungs of rivers. But now, some rain lands on bare ground, on highlands stripped of soil, on deserts growing in the footprints of forests. There are places where rain meets no root, no leaf, no sponge of moss to catch it. It falls and is lost. No echo of growth follows, only the hiss of evaporation. And yet, it still arrives. It does not judge where it lands. It does not hesitate. It simply falls, again and again, as if searching, as if remembering, as if whispering, "You were green once," in the Atacama Desert, where no rain has touched the earth for years. Ancient seeds still wait. In the Namib, fog carries moisture from sea to dune, a horizontal rain tracing memory along the sand. And in the exposed rock of badlands and floodplains, you can still see where rain once ran, channels fossilized in stone, ghost rivers. The ghosts of rain are not spectral. They are geologic. They are seen in the mineral rings on cave walls, in the calcium curtains formed by dripping persistence. They are written in tree rings from centuries past, some wide, some narrow, an oscillating language of wet and dry, boom and burn. Even in coral reefs, long dead and bleached, you can find the isotopic memory of rain, carried from mountain to sea, filtered through the roots of vanished trees. Rain records itself, quietly, and it teaches us that even absence is part of the story. When rain stops falling, everything shifts. Rivers narrow, animals migrate, forests contract, dust begins to move. The earth inhales less, but the breath does not stop, because somewhere the cycle continues: evaporation, condensation, return. The sky still carries oceans in its arms, and where the rain lands, something always stirs. Lichen begins the work of reclamation. A cracked seed swears, a stone darkens with water for the first time in decades. And sometimes a seed forgotten for centuries awakens. There are lotuses grown from seeds over 1,000 years old, desert wildflowers blooming after decades of drought, their petals not new but remembered, carried through time in stillness, waiting for that one drop. And we too remember rain, in scent, in sound, in the way our skin lifts when it falls after long absence, the smell of petrita, the earth's own exhale after the sky has returned. We build channels and tanks. We name months for wet and dry. We follow the monsoon. We wait because we know, in some part of us older than words, that rain is not just weather, it is return. It is the earth touching itself, sky to stone, cloud to seed, memory to breath. And even when it falls where nothing waits, perhaps that too is sacred. Perhaps rain is a ritual, performed even in absence, a signal, a promise that something can grow again. Yet what if even forgotten rain carries memory? And yet, if water falls on silence long enough, could the silence begin to bloom again? There was a time before breath, before wind stirred leaves, before lungs had evolved, before sky and sea divided cleanly. The world was ocean, vast, warm, thick with dissolved iron, a deep, silent broth beneath a sky of methane and carbon. There was no blue, no white clouds drifting, no air as we know it. The earth had not yet learned to breathe. But in the shallows, something tiny began to stir. Cyanobacteria, ancient, microscopic architects of change, drifted through the light. They did not move quickly, nor seek conquest. They simply did what life does best: transform. Through photosynthesis, they drank sunlight and exhaled a gas unknown to the world, oxygen. At first it had nowhere to go. It reacted violently with iron in the oceans, turning it to rust. Clouds of iron oxide sank to the seafloor, layer upon layer, band upon band, a sedimentary memory now known as banded iron formations. These formations, dark red, black, grey, still lie beneath our feet, folded into mountain roots, lifted high by the tectonic breath of time. Each band is an exhale, each stripe a breath. They show us the moment the earth turned inward, when oceans changed, and sky began. Because once the iron was used up, once it had rusted and settled, oxygen had nowhere else to go but up. And so the sky began to fill, with air, with light, with the possibility of breath. It's called the Great Oxidation Event. But maybe we could call it the first breath. Before this there was no ozone, no safe shore from ultraviolet light. Life stayed hidden in water. But as oxygen rose, new forms emerged. The chemistry of the planet changed. Some life died, other life awakened, and the sky for the first time could carry sound, could hold birds, one day could shelter lungs. The stone remembers. Iron-rich rocks still shimmer with that memory, in hematite, in magnetite, in red beds that color canyons and mazes with the blush of ancient rust. Even today, some of the oxygen you breathe may carry atoms once exhaled in that ancient sea, and deep within the crust, pockets of untouched rock still carry the old chemistry, pre-oxygen, pre-sky. They are rare, but they hum with what once was. Mountains made of these stones rise quietly. They carry within them not just heat and pressure, but the first true consequence of breath. Because breath is not just for lungs, it is for change, for reaction, for memory made physical. Oxygen gave shape to flame, to rust, to blood. It tied together air and life, and time. And now, when we watch a leaf breathe, when we see a rock stained red in the desert sun, when we inhale after rain, we are part of that long arc. We are not separate. We are the inheritors of that first exhale. That breath never stopped. It only changed form, from microbe to moss, to lung to word. Even now, as oxygen levels rise and fall, with forests, with oceans, with fire and frost, the earth is still breathing in rhythm with itself. And somewhere beneath our feet, in layers folded by tectonic sleep, the rust of that first breath still lingers, still glows. Might mountains still carry that first exhale of life? And yet, if the sky was once a sea of iron, how many more breaths has the earth forgotten, only to breathe them back into form again? There are places so old, so undisturbed, they have forgotten how to change, places where the crust no longer drifts, no longer fractures or folds, but simply remains. These are the cretins, the ancient hearts of continents, the deep roots of land, silent, unmoving, and unimaginably old. Some are over 4 billion years in age, older than oceans, older than life as we know it, born when the planet was still glowing with its own internal fire. They are not loud places. They do not host volcanoes or great rifts. They are not lifted into towering peaks or ground into canyons. They lie beneath the noise, unshaken. Shields of stone, the Canadian shield, the Cabal Cretan in South Africa, the Pilbara and Yilgarn in Australia, the Baltic and the Brazilian. Each a different face of the same deep memory, composed of the Earth's earliest crust. These regions have survived collisions, subductions, meltdowns, and eons of erosion, while mountains rose and fell, while seas came and went, while forests bloomed and burned. The Cretans stayed still. Their granite cores are thick, buoyant enough to resist being pulled under. Their lithosphere extends hundreds of kilometers deep. Not just a surface, but a spine. They are not fossils. They are foundations, and perhaps in that stillness, they have become the most complete memory of all. The minerals within them tell stories no other stone can tell. Zircons, tiny, ancient crystals, form clocks that measure time in billions. Some hold isotopic traces of liquid water from before the first rain fell on land. These zircons found in Cretans are the Earth's earliest diary entries, scrawled not in ink, but in isotope, in oxygen-18, in uranium's decay into lead. They speak softly, but they speak clearly. The planet cooled, water flowed, something stirred, and the Cretans watched. They watched the first crust solidify. They watched supercontinents assemble, then drift apart. They watched the great oxidation bloom. They watched glaciers bury the equator. They watched the Cambrian explosion unfold like a sudden breath, and they did not move. Perhaps stillness is not absence. Perhaps it is the deepest form of listening, because while younger plates shatter and slide, these ancient cores endure, not immune, but rooted, and within them deep diamond pipes rise, volcanic relics that brought crystals from the mantle to the surface, cutting through time. Even their stillness holds pressure, enough to forge gemstones from carbon caught in the dark. The Cretans hold memory in silence, in depth, in density. No satellite can see their boundaries. No map reveals their breadth. But seismic waves slow as they pass through, a deep hesitation, a pause in motion, as if the earth itself recognizes them, steps carefully around them, and in that shadow, that shield, life has found safety, stability. Where the land does not shift, roots grow deep, soils mature, watersheds persist. We build cities atop them, we mine their minerals, we walk unknowingly on the oldest parts of the world, and beneath it all, the Cretan dreams. It does not rise, it does not fall, it simply holds the memory of breath, from the planet's first exhale to its most recent whisper. Perhaps stillness is the final form of remembrance. And yet, if the Earth's oldest silence still echoes through stone, what deeper voices might be waiting beneath even that quiet? Beneath the still Cretans, beneath the sleeping folds of ancient crust, there are scars that once glowed, not from fracture, but from fire. Rivers of molten rock once surged through these deep layers, liquid heat forced into cracks, seeking paths, inscribing lines of motion through a planet still restless in its skin. They were not chaotic. They followed pressure. They followed weakness. They followed breath. These were the dikes and sills, veins of forgotten heat, intrusions that spread like arteries through the lithosphere. Basalt, rhyolite, andesite, each composition a different rhythm of the Earth's fireblood, each cooling into forms now hidden beneath layers of time. In some places the rock never erupted. It solidified underground, trapped, silent. The magma paused, then crystallized, leaving behind walls of obsidian, of pegmatite thick with quartz and feldspar. of gabbro flecked with iron and olivine. They are the frozen breath of fire. You can still see them on cliff faces where erosion has peeled back the crust, in canyons where time has cut through miles of sediment, in Arctic exposures where glaciers have scraped the surface clean, long black lines, sharp and unmoving, once liquid, now memory, and yet they still pulse, not with motion, but with presence. Magnetism lingers in the crystals, remnant fields, frozen records of where magnetic north pointed when the rock last cooled. We map them, we follow them, we read them like veins on a palm. In places like the Canadian Shield, or the Deccan Traps of India, or the Mid-Continent Rift, these veins tell us of a time when the earth cracked open, not in destruction, but in release. Magma didn't always explode. Sometimes it poured. Lava fields stretched for miles, flooding land with dark, glossy rock cooling into ridges, pillows, columns of basalt that now echo with the earth's past heat. And deep beneath those flows, the intrusions remain, still, buried, waiting. Some are reawakened by tectonics, others are mined, their crystals harvested, their rare minerals pulled from forgotten pressure. Still others lie undisturbed, entombed in silence. But silence, we've learned, is never without breath. Heat still seeps upward through them. Water, drawn down by gravity and fault, is warmed by their touch, rises back toward the surface as hot springs, as geysers, as steam in volcanic fields. Even in sleep, the veins feed something. Even in cooling, they remember how to warm. And there are places beneath Iceland, beneath Yellowstone, beneath Ethiopia, where magma stirs again, veins of heat, becoming rivers once more. Do these veins still dream of flowing again? And yet, if the planet's fire can pause for millions of years, and stir again beneath our feet, how many other ancient dreams are only sleeping, not gone? There was a time when the breath of the sky arrived like a promise, heavy with scent, carrying seeds, silt and sound. It moved with certainty, a seasonal pulse returning like the tide, binding mountains to plains, forests to rivers, people to soil, the monsoon. It was not just weather, it was structure. It was memory made motion. Winds shifted, clouds rose, and with them came rain. Not gently, but all at once. Rain that carved canyons in hours. Rain that turned dust into rice fields. Rain that defined the rhythm of life. In the Indian subcontinent, in the Sahel, in Southeast Asia, monsoons shaped not only land, but history. They were the breath of empires. Their coming meant grain. Their absence, collapse. You can trace their rise in sediment, the sudden increase in river discharge, the spike of pollen in lake beds, the thick layers of flood-borne clay sitting atop drier soil, and you can trace their retreat, the slow fade, the long pause, when rain did not arrive, when rivers shrank, when cities emptied. Some monsoons shifted their course, some vanished for centuries, others returned, but never quite the same. In the bones of Harappan wells, you can see where the water once stood, high, then low, then gone. In the ghost towns of the Sahara, now buried in dunes, you find remnants of lakes, of cattle paths, of rain once faithful. What silenced the breath? Was it orbit? Volcanic ash? A shift in sea temperature, so subtle it took decades to know. The earth does not answer quickly. It only changes. It only lets go. And in that letting go, deserts bloom, not with flowers, but with silence. Yet the mountain remembers. High in the Himalayas, old glacial cores hold trace isotopes that match the pulse of monsoons past. In Tibetan lake beds, you can read the rhythm in the mud. Wet, dry, wet, gone. These records are not just about rainfall. They are breath charts, oxygen levels, dust loads, signs of air once saturated with memory. Even the stones remember, on steep slopes once lashed by monsoon storms. Terraces erode slowly now, waiting, listening, and still the winds return, but they are weaker, or they shift, or they come too early, or too late. The breath stumbles, and with it, everything else. Yet not all is lost. In some years the clouds gather again, the air grows thick, the scent of petrichor rises, and for a moment the monsoon returns. Villages reopen cracked cisterns, dust gives way to bloom, crickets begin their chorus, children watch the sky as if listening for an old song, because rain is not just water, it is memory falling back into form. Even in a single drop, there is the echo of what once was, the forests it touched, the rivers it filled, the mouths it nourished. And somewhere the mountain waits. It watches clouds form on the horizon. It feels the weight of humidity rise through valley air. It braces its slopes for the impact of return. Is the mountain still waiting for one more rain? And yet, if the breath of the monsoon can vanish, then hover just beyond the ridge. What else might be returning? Slower, softer, but still on its way. There are stones that speak not in language, not in voice, but in what they carry. They do not change. They do not decay. They endure, and in their structure, in their isotopes and layers, they remember not just erosion, not just uplift, but the breath of atmospheres, the chemistry of ocean, the exact composition of extinction, somewhere beneath your feet, in limestone that once cradled coral, in shale pressed from the quiet ooze of seafloors, in volcanic rock cooled beneath ancient skies. Memory waits. It is patient. It is precise. In Greenland's oldest rocks, tiny inclusions of zircon preserve oxygen signatures from over 4 billion years ago. Trapped within their lattice is a snapshot of Earth's earliest water, a whisper of liquid, before rivers, before rain, before roots. In Antarctica, ice sheets hold air bubbles, but deeper still, stone holds fire. Basalt flows remember eruption. The gases they exhaled, carbon, sulfur, fluorine fossilized into crystals, into flows, into time. And in these stones there is story of oxygen rising, of forests breathing, of oceans acidifying, then healing, of life blinking out and blinking back in. Every extinction has its rock, a line, a layer, a shift in isotopes, a silence in fossils, a thin band of iridium marking the impact of something from beyond the sky. And in that line, the Earth remembers pain. It does not flinch. It simply holds it. We break open these rocks with hammers, with drills, with lasers tuned to measure the light of vanished atoms. We read their ratios, carbon-12 to carbon-13, oxygen-18 to oxygen-16, lead decaying from uranium, ticking away like a stone heart. These are diaries not written in ink, but in difference in density, in arrangement, in resistance to change. Each layer, a sentence, each crystal, a breath. Even sediment speaks, a grain of quartz, telling of a glacier's slow grind, or a desert wind's wandering script. Nothing is too small to matter, nothing too still to speak, and the mountain knows this. In its core, gneiss twisted into elegant folds, holds pressures unthinkable, stones that were once mud, now poetry in metamorphosis. In caves, speleothems, stalactites and stalagmites build themselves ring by ring like trees, recording floods and droughts without ever seeing the sun. Even in cliffs you can trace sea levels rising, falling, a heartbeat in limestone. The Earth is not trying to forget. It is trying to remember differently, through density, through silence, through stone. And perhaps we were meant to learn that language, not to dominate it, but to listen, because stone does not hurry. It simply endures, and in its endurance, everything stays, every breath of life, every extinction, every recovery. It is all still here, encoded in isotopes, trapped in lattices, whispered through crystal grain. And so, perhaps memory was never meant to fade. And yet, if stone can carry so much so quietly, for so long, what else might the earth still be holding, just beneath the next layer we've yet to open? Beneath the mountain's weight, beneath the crust we walk on, there is breath, slow, silent, unseen, not in the way lungs move, not with air, but with porosity, with pressure, with ancient memory diffusing between mineral and void. This is the lithosphere's breath. It is not measured in seconds, it is measured in centuries, in the time it takes for water to migrate through pores in sandstone, for methane to rise through fractured shale, for hydrogen to leak from iron-rich seams. Beneath us, the earth breathes, in aquifers trapped within sedimentary basins, in gas hydrates forming beneath oceanic crust, in pockets of carbon dioxide exhaled from magma, long cooled. The lithosphere is not solid, not truly. It is sponge. It is sieve. It is lung. Its pores are microscopic, its channels winding and narrow, but they are vast in number, an underground labyrinth where breath and water weave through stone like thought, through sleep. Deep within this porous realm, microbes drift, not in sunlight, not in oxygen, but in rock, entire ecosystems, sealed from the surface for millions of years, live in fractures and brines and clay. They feed on the decay of radioactive elements. They respire sulfur, or iron, or methane. They are Earth's oldest breath, still moving in the South African gold mines. Scientists found life 2 miles beneath the surface. Bacteria feeding on hydrogen split from water by uranium decay. No photosynthesis, no atmosphere, just breath born from stone itself. Could this be where the mountain's last breath still lingers? Not in the air we know, but in the seep of time, through mineral. In some layers gases accumulate. They build pressure, and then they release. A sudden exhale through a fault line, a bubble rising in a hot spring, a pulse of methane from thawing permafrost. And yet, most of the time, this breathing is soft, barely a movement, barely a shift. But always there, we use this breath. We draw water from ancient aquifers. We extract gas from fractured rock. We tunnel through salt domes and find pressure waiting. Sometimes we think we have stilled the earth, paved it, gridded it, measured it, but beneath our feet, the lithosphere inhales and exhales on a timescale we can barely comprehend. It responds to weight, to the melting of glaciers, to the building of mountains. It flexes, it flows, it adjusts. The breath is not constant. It shifts with heat, with tectonic tension, with the chemistry of groundwater flowing across mineral boundaries. And in this movement, there is memory. The way certain gases are trapped in basalt tells of ancient volcanic pulses. The way water carves through porous rock tells of past floods, past droughts, past skies. The lithosphere records not just what lies above it, but what passed through, a slow archive written in vapor, in diffusion, in the whispers of ions. And maybe this is what the mountain becomes after its voice is gone, from the wind, not silent, but internal, still breathing, just differently, not in clouds, but in capillaries of stone, not in rhythm we can hear, but in the chemical exhale of matter stilling conversation. We may not feel it, but we walk across lungs every time we cross a valley, a plain, a broken hill. The lithosphere still speaks, still breathes, still remembers. Could this be where the mountain's last breath still lingers? And yet, if breath can pass invisibly through stone, who's to say it ever truly ends at all? There was a time when stone and leaf spoke the same language, not in words but in exchange, a communion between mineral and chlorophyll, between uplift and photosynthesis, between the quiet strength of mountains and the green exhale of life. These were the oxygen cathedrals, forests, vast and humming, rooted in highlands newly born from tectonic sleep. Their trunks climbed into light, anchored in soil made from powdered granite, from schist, from basalt eroded into fertility. The mountain gave its body, crumbling slowly into silt and dust, and the forest gave it breath, oxygen, shade, humus, and song. They were never separate. The Andes fed the Amazon, the Himalayas seeded the Ganges plain, the ancient Caledonian range scattered roots across what would become Europe's forests. This was a cycle, but more than that, it was a liturgy. Rain fell, rocks cracked, minerals flowed into lowlands. Forests rose from that offering, their leaves catching light, their stomata exchanging gases with the wind, and with every breath, the sky changed. Oxygen increased, carbon drew down, the atmosphere cooled, then settled. It was a world made not by fire but by breath. A world where trees were architects of air, where each ring of wood recorded not just age but atmosphere. Even now you can hold a slice of fossilized forest petrified wood from the Devonian, carboniferous coal seams buried beneath mountains, and see the memory of air once exhaled by roots. They built the oxygen we now depend on, not in haste, but in rhythm. Millions of years of quiet work, mountains feeding soil, soil cradling trees, trees building sky. The great ferns, the lycopods, the seed ferns, they all sang in green chorus, a slow cathedral hymn, converting stone into cloud, sunlight into breath. And in that exhale, lungs began. Animals stirred, insects grew vast in the oxygen-rich air, amphibians emerged from shallow pools. Life unfolded in the space made by trees. The forest canopy was a roof, the mountain slopes, its columns, and the breath between them. The sky we know, even today, the pattern continues. Alpine forests cling to slopes, where soil is thin, drawing minerals from crumbling rock. Mosses colonize cliffs, lichens dissolve stone with acid, and beneath the canopy, microbial networks weave between roots, connecting miles of mountain with silent conversation, each tree a mouth, each leaf a prayer, and every gust of wind a procession of breath. But now the hymn falters, deforestation thins the choir, erosion accelerates beyond what soil can renew, atmosphere shifts, not in geologic time, but in the span of a lifetime, and still the mountains hold steady, still they offer their bones to the forest, still they send down rivers carrying calcium and phosphorus, and time. The cathedrals remain, some crumbling, some quiet, some still echoing. And when you walk beneath redwoods or hike through spruce-scented trails, you can feel it, that vast invisible architecture still breathing around you. Stone and leaf, root and ridge, one exhaling memory, the other shaping it into air. Is this the cathedral of our breath, still echoing with prayers of air? And yet, if sky and forest still whisper across stone, might we be walking through their shared song without ever knowing it? Because sometimes the hymn ends, a hillside falls, a glacier melts away, a cliff fractures and tumbles into its own shadow. The land shifts, the silence settles, and for a moment it seems like breath has stopped. But even collapse is not an ending. It is only a turning, a folding inward, a held breath before another begins. Landslides gouge the bones of the mountain. They pull down trees, boulders, whole fields in a single sweep. They leave scars, exposed roots, stone raw to the sky. But the earth is not ashamed of rupture. It wears its breaks with patience, and into those broken places, life returns. First comes lichen, dust-coloured, threadbare, clutching at shattered stone. Then moss, soft and slow, weaving velvet across rubble. Spores drift in. Then seeds. Some wait for years, Some wait for centuries, but they come. Grasses split cracks in slate, birch and alder root in unstable soil, reaching toward a sky that has not changed. Insects hum over puddles, caught in tilted stone, and always the water returns, a trickle through gravel, a spring emerging where the slope fractured just enough. Moisture settles into the hollows, and from it, breath, even in the wake of glaciers, after miles of ice retreat into memory. Something stirs. What was once frozen for millennia becomes lake, becomes river, becomes meadow. Glacial till, once sharp with shattered stone, softens beneath rainfall, and life begins to thread its way through the silence. Algae, tiny rootlets, midges, and gnats, and over decades, forests, not the same as before, but new, adapted, braver. We call it succession. But maybe it is more than that. Maybe it is the breath restarting, because collapse is never complete. Even ash becomes soil. Even silence is fertile, if given time. The mountain knows this. It crumbles, yes. It folds, it breaks, it falls, but it also rises again, not upward, but inward, through the green that returns to its slopes, through the wind that speaks again across its scarred ridgelines, through the moss that pulls moisture from the air and turns stone into sponge. There is no final stillness here, only transformation. Every fallen peak becomes foothill, every shattered ledge becomes a cradle for something new, and we often arrive after the collapse, mistaking it for ruin, not knowing that the breath has already begun again beneath our feet, because breath is not just what stirs the lungs. It is what stirs the soil, what stirs the root, what stirs the silence. A single green blade pushing through scree as the earth saying, "I am not done." A spider weaving between stones is a whisper. Something lives here again. The exhale may pause, but the inhale waits just beyond, and perhaps this is the truest rhythm. Not uninterrupted breath, but breath that stops, that folds, that forgets, and then somehow begins again. Maybe the end of one breath is always the start of another, and yet, if even collapse contains the seed of return, how many quiet beginnings are already underway, unnoticed in the rubble? We live atop the earth's skin, as though it were ours alone. We build, we carve, we name, we lay roads across valleys, we raise towers in the shadow of ancient ridges, we breathe deeply on mountaintops, and think ourselves permanent. But the stone remembers otherwise, because in the long rhythm of geologic time, we too are sediment. We too are stories that will settle. One day, our cities will crumble. Our structures, steel, glass, concrete, will soften under weather and wind. Our monuments will fall into ruin. Our monuments will become strata. Bridges will rust. Windows will fill with silt. Towers will be colonized by vines, then moss, then dust. And that dust will drift, carried by water, by gravity, by time, settling into basins, into rivers, into ocean shelves where new stone forms. We who named the mountains will become part of their memory, not as rulers, not as makers, but as layers, as trace elements, a thin line of technofossils, plastics, pigments, isotopes pressed between limestone and shale. We think of fossils as bones, but perhaps our fossil will be different. A fleck of ceramic, a rusted bolt sealed in clay, the residue of combustion, the echo of language etched in polymer, illegible but present. And within that layer, our breath will linger, carbon drawn from air, baked into concrete, nitrogen, sulfur, metal, looping back into the planet's bloodstream, and the mountains will rise again. Perhaps not these, perhaps others, lifted by collisions we'll never see, formed from continents that have yet to imagine themselves, but in their bones, trapped in quartz, folded into granite, will be us, our shape, our residue, our moment of reaching, and maybe, just maybe, Some future breath will walk a ridgeline and find a piece of us, a shard of glass, smooth with time, embedded in metamorphic stone. They will not know our names, but they might wonder, who were they, these ones who breathed in awe at the peaks and thought themselves outside of time? Who were these builders of stone on stone, who tried to speak through height and span and spire? And if the earth holds any memory of us, it will not be in what we claimed, it will be in how we listened, in the quiet of our footsteps on forest trails, in the pause before we entered a canyon, in the way we laid our palms against ancient stone and felt something move, not outside us, but within, because awe is also a fossil. It leaves a shape, a soft indentation in the world's skin, and if the mountains remember us, it won't be for what we built, it will be for how we knelt, how we looked up, how we breathed them in, without needing to understand. One day we too will sleep in stone, and in that sleep, we may become something gentler, less certain, more patient. And the earth will carry us, as it has carried everything, not as burden, but as breath folded into rock. Will they remember how we once breathed them in awe? And yet, if we are destined to join the sediment, could the mountain be preparing even now to carry our memory forward, quietly, kindly, without forgetting, because even now, the earth is still breathing, not with wind alone, or wave, or weather, but with motion beneath motion, with silence beneath sound. We think of breath as something human, a rise of chest, a rhythm we control, or forget, until stillness reminds us. But the planet breathes differently. Wider, slower, it expands in rift valleys, in the slow parting of oceanic plates, in the soft uplift of rebounding crust where glaciers once held it down. It contracts in trenches, where crust slips beneath crust, where earthquakes whisper their deep unrest. It exhales in volcanic arcs, in geysers, in the curl of steam rising from a forest after rain, and inhales again, pulling water through fractured limestone, drawing minerals into the cycle, sifting dust across continents to seed what grows. The mountain does not hold its breath, it releases it, so slowly we forget to notice, but it's there, in the daily change of shadow across a valley, in the lichen thickening across a rock face, in the migration of water through snowpack, into stream, into aquifer, into root. Even in the absence of movement, there is breath, a deep, patient rhythm we once knew how to feel, and maybe we still do, when we stand on a ridgeline and feel the wind press against us, when we listen to the hush of pine needles shifting, when we pause long enough to let silence fill the space between heartbeats. We return to that rhythm, we match it, not as visitors, but as kin, because this planet is not just where we live, it is what we are. We are carbon from ancient volcanoes, iron from stellar dust folded into crust, water from comet impacts, from glacial melt, from breath exhaled by forests. We are in every way part of the Earth's respiration, and when we forget this, we lose something, not knowledge, but presence. But when we remember, when we slow enough to feel the expansion of roots beneath the soil, the gentle heaving of tectonic restlessness, the invisible swirl of microbes beneath our feet, then we find ourselves again, still breathing. The mountain never stopped, it just moved too slowly for our rushing minds. But its breath is still there, woven into the breeze, the groundwater, the slow decay of fallen things that feed the future. It is in the silence before dawn, in the weight of dusk settling over high places, in the pause after thunder, when the earth seems to hold its breath again, just long enough for us to listen. And maybe that's all we've ever needed to do, not to conquer or define or own, but to listen, to feel, to become part of the rhythm again. Even now the earth moves, it exhales, it remembers, and maybe, when we listen close enough, we breathe with it still. And yet, if the mountain is still breathing, Maybe we are only now beginning to remember how to breathe along with it.